US President Donald Trump says a framework deal for the future of Greenland is in place, and he says he's dropping his tariff threats against Europe. Trump has been insisting the US needs to own the Arctic island, which is a self-governing territory of Denmark's. But he appeared to back down after meeting the NATO chief Mark Rutte at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Rutte says he didn't propose any compromise on Greenland's sovereignty, but Trump still claims that he got everything that he wanted.
Donald Trump's announcement of a framework deal for Greenland came suddenly and unexpectedly. The last 2 weeks saw implicit and explicit threats by the US president. He refused to rule out military force and threatened NATO allies with tariffs for opposing him. During his Davos speech, Trump repeated his desire to acquire the Arctic island.
People thought I would use force. I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
And then, just hours later, a declaration of success.
Can you give us more details about the deal?
No, it's a great deal for everybody. It's a long-term deal. It's the ultimate long-term deal. And I think it puts everybody in a really good position, especially as it pertains to security and minerals and everything else.
The US already had military access to Greenland as part of a long-standing agreement with Denmark, a point the Greenlandic and Danish governments made repeatedly. So why create the crisis to begin with? Some say it's classic Trumpian headline grabbing. Others point to mineral rights. There is also speculation that the answer could lie on Wall Street, which closed higher following the news.
It seems like Trump really creates a lot of volatility for no reason when he really had no intention of following through with this. But, you know, we've gotten used to this with Trump, and it gave us an opportunity to buy stocks yesterday, so we were quite happy about it.
Despite the fanfare, the precise details of the framework deal have yet to be made public. Nonetheless, back in Washington, some Republicans celebrated the news by carving up a Greenland-shaped cake decorated with the stars and stripes.
Let's talk about this with Brandon Bourne. He's a political analyst at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. That's a German non-profit organisation. Great to have you in the studio, Brandon. Give me your thoughts, first of all, on this framework agreement that we're hearing about on Greenland.
Well, I think the damage has been done in many ways. We have an apparent framework agreement. We'll see what the details are exactly. Apparently, it's a renegotiation of this 1951 defense agreement, bilateral agreement between Denmark and the United States. But again, the damage has been done. I think the idea that the Europeans would feel a sigh of relief that the military option was taken off the table in relation to acquiring Greenland, the fact that it was on the table in the first place, that the United States military would be attacking a sovereign territory of a NATO ally, that has long-term consequences for this relationship.
Trump does seem to have walked back on these threats because, as you're saying, this, almost unimaginable thought of the US military moving into Greenland, taking Greenland by force. Do you think that, backing down or apparently backing down like this was all part of his negotiating tactics?
Well, sure. I mean, we know from the last 12 months he tends to take this maximalist position, shock and awe, and then walk back and find some sort of compromise that apparently satisfies all sides. But look at the collateral damage of the last 2 weeks. Maybe he got the deal that he wanted in the first place, but what's the cost of the last 2 weeks in the transatlantic relationship? We have, the speech itself, where, in typical Trumpian fashion, it was completely undiplomatic and pulled the European leaders through the mud. You have the national security strategy that talks about the civilizational erasure of Europe and the need for the U.S. to put Europe on the right path, things that he echoed yesterday in his speech. The European Parliament voted to put the U.S.-EU trade agreement that was agreed last year on ice for now. So there are long-term consequences here, even if he did get the deal that he wanted in the first place. Was it necessary?
So from all of that you've said, who do you actually think came out on top here? Because if we look at what has come out of it, it seems like Trump's emerge with really no more than he had already. So who's the winner here, if you can put it like that?
Well, I think in some ways, of course, the United States, if its goal was to expand its military presence in the Arctic region, then maybe that's been accomplished. But we have this agreement in place. We have the NATO alliance that is expanding its presence into the Arctic region already. So I agree that we don't really see a major change here. This could be also seen by the Europeans as a potential win because, it shows that the Europeans can, if they show resolve, if they show unity, they can push back.
You mentioned the transatlantic relationship, Europe-US ties earlier. It's taken so many hits, hasn't it? Just in the first year of Trump's second term. Do you sense a change in Europe's leaders' attitudes towards Donald Trump?
Absolutely. And we actually have a study on this in my organization, the Bertelsmann Stiftung, a public opinion poll that shows that 70% of Europeans, even though the United States and Europe have long worked together, they want Europe to go its own way. Simultaneously, if they're asked, who's the most important partner of Europe? Still more Europeans say the United States. And these details in many ways reflect this difficult balancing act. Of course, on the one hand, the United States is an incredibly important partner for Europe, both in terms of economics, in terms of security. That will remain the case. But the long-term goal for Europe should be to become more independent of the United States. And I think European leaders are starting to realize that they should after the last 2 weeks.
We've got a meeting with EU heads of state later today, and what's being labelled as an emergency summit on Greenland. Now, obviously, this was planned before Donald Trump's speech and what's emerged in the last 24 hours. What is going to be on their agenda, do you think? What are they going to be focusing on right now as this situation moves forward?
Yeah. I mean, as you said, the number of the threats that were on the table, the military option, the tariffs that were set to take effect on the 1st of February, these are off the table. But I think in many ways, the talks at this emergency summit are going to be about, of course, we also have the details of this agreement that have to be discussed. I imagine that will be a point of conversation. But the takeaway for European leaders in this moment is that, of course, there has to be open dialogue with the United States, but it can't be complete appeasement. If unity and resolve is shown, the Europeans can stand up to this administration. Now, the goal of the Europeans, it shouldn't be to save the transatlantic relationship that once was, where it just worked automatically and the United States was on the side of Europe. Those days are probably over. The goal is to become more sovereign, more independent, to be able to chart a common European agenda moving forward, to work with the United States when it makes sense, but also to defend the interests of Europe in the case that Washington isn't on the side of Europe.
Brandon Bourne from the Bertelsmann Stiftung. Brandon, thank you so much for your analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We asked DW Washington correspondent Misha Komodowski what's actually known about this framework deal.
Quite a bit. Sources close to these talks tell DW that the emerging Greenland framework rests on essentially 4 core elements. First, the U.S. would suspend planned tariffs tied to this dispute. Second, Washington and its partners would reopen the 1951 Defense Agreement, which governs the stationing of U.S. troops in Greenland. Third, the U.S. would gain a formal role in reviewing strategic foreign investments on the island, citing security concerns in the Arctic. And fourth, European allies would commit to a stronger security presence in Greenland. Our colleague Michaela Kufner reports that the framework is not yet final, according to officials, and key details remain under negotiation. And according to the New York Times, NATO officials discussed a plan that would allow the U.S. to control small areas of Greenland to build military bases. The idea has been compared to British military bases in Cyprus.
That was Misha Komodowski in Washington. So what does Copenhagen think about this so-called framework? Journalist Jakob Illeborg gave us the Danish reaction.
An extraordinary twist to an extraordinary day, you could say. The Danish foreign minister has said that he thinks it is too early to call, if you will. He says the day ends better than it started, but that we still have to wait for the details of this deal. I think overall, sort of both bemusement, some relief, of course, as well. Our Swedish neighbors came out with what they say is great relief, but I think here in Copenhagen, people are still holding their breath.